Interesting because there's two dynamics in the industry. We had a whole event dedicated to this topic earlier this month in New York called the IP Production Summit, and a lot of the topics there focus on this high-end broadcaster level discussion of, okay, how am I going to prepare for maybe 4K, maybe HDR, potentially an at-home production model, and do I have to invest in IP infrastructure in order to do that? And a lot of it is costly, a lot of it is somewhat dangerous because you're not sure if you're going down the wrong path, but it's very much high-end. In this conversation, we're going to be at the opposite and talk about how not only is it not necessarily, your first objective is not future-proofing, which is a lot of things. It's current-proofing. It's now-proofing. It's how the hell else am I going to do these events if I don't have this kind of infrastructure? And it's also very economical in a lot of cases, which again, on that high end, is not necessarily the case. So it's an interesting dynamic. If you ever check out sportsvideo.org, we write a lot about both sides. But today we're going to talk about how you can use IP to produce more events, produce those events better at a higher quality, and ideally for a little bit cheaper, or at least a reasonable number, we'll say. So I want to start with you guys. We won't do sort of a formal, this is my name, this is where I'm from, this is what I want to do in 6th grade. We're going to do an overview of what your operation is, why you decided to sort of go towards this IP infrastructure, install a central control room, and what it looks like. So I think we'll go ahead and start with Jose here on this side. Jose, so what did your guys' operation look like before? What does it look like now? And why did you make that move?
Yeah, so I started at the University of Portland about 4 years ago, and when I got there, we had a fly pack with a NewTek TriCaster, a mixer, a replay system, and we used to have to lug it around between our 3 facilities. It was truly a pain in the ass, to be honest. I hated having to take it down every single game, put it back up every single game. Took up pretty much the majority of my time. It also, I think, affected our production because we were setting up instead of focusing on what we were going to do for that particular game. So we established a centralized control room where we just wrapped up year 2 of it, and it's been a game changer for us. I think without it, we wouldn't be able to produce the quality that we do, and IP has been a huge backbone for it. We use Dante, we use Clearcom's HelixNet. We use NDI a little bit. We were fortunate that our campus is all fibered, so I had access to the fiber for the camera runs. So that was cost saving, first of all, but if we didn't have that, we absolutely would have gone with NDI because there's no way we would have been able to afford to dig holes and trench and run fiber between our 3 facilities. So IP for us has been, without it, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing.
Right. So what is an average set? I mean, obviously it depends on the venue, depends on the sport, but what does an average production look like today compared to the rolling out the TriCaster, setting it up, putting it back? It kind of take us through an average workflow.
So now, before I would show up, I think 5-6 hours before a game, set up the fly pack, run all the cables, fax it out to make sure it's working. But now we show up a couple hours before. I send out the camera crew, I send out our audio to set up mics. And in the meantime, instead of the time that I would waste on setting up the gear so that we can stream it, I spend actually producing, which is what I should be doing. I'm not worrying about running cables so that we can have a signal. So, now we can do multi-camera, we can do truly a full production for all our sports. Before, a lot of it was we have to pick if there's a volleyball game and a soccer game going on at the exact same time, which one's going to suffer, which one's going to get the one camera plugged into my laptop using Wirecast to stream out to our CDN. Now we can quickly turn around. All we have to do is move the gear from one venue to the other. The control room is there. It's already set. We don't need to waste that time. And overall, it's increased just the production across the board for all our sports. We also didn't used to stream baseball. Baseball is one of our highest viewed sports, as we found in the last few years when we started streaming it. And the centralized control room is the key to it.
Cool. Scott, tell us a little bit about your operation, why you went the way that you did, and what it looks like today.
Sure, Jason. So my role, I'll just be very honest, my role is very different from everyone else on the panel. I'm the executive producer of the Lafayette Sports Network, so my role is more management and administrative. The Lafayette Sports Network has existed for 21 years, and obviously we haven't been streaming all of those years, but we've been streaming for about half of that, a little more than half of that actually. And very similar, we've had the pain in the butt experience of lugging everything from venue to venue. And for about the last 7 years, I've been lobbying, I would say hard, but it sounds hard to say that, you know, because it took me 7 years. I can be very patient, I guess, or persistent, but lobbying to have a live streaming control room, a centralized live streaming control room. We were able to pull that off. It's actually still in its first year of existence. It's part of our office suite too, and what it's enabled us to do is just phenomenal. We're light years above where we were, and this technology has not only allowed us to afford it on a small budget, really no budget. I mean, no one actually ever plans to have a budget to put in a control room, right? You have to lobby for that and lobby hard. But you know, this has enabled us to not only afford to install the control room, but add the TC1, the TriCaster TC1, add fiber to all of our venues, which we have a campus, I'm sure very similar to many in the room, about 3 miles north of our main campus that did not have our campus network on up until this past summer. So we were able to have our fiber installed in the ground out there to each of our venues, which was absolutely huge. So the quality and the quality of life of our production crew, just being able to add elements like replay on a regular basis where we're not squeezed into a tiny press box and you had to use a shoehorn to get people in there. We actually have the accommodations in a very, very spacious control room now.
Happy crew, happy life. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. I think we got a couple photos of your facility. If
we
if
do,
we wanted to,
and I will enjoy embarrassing our video production manager, John Sabino, who I know is in the room. He did approve these pictures.
Oh. Nope, that's my picture.
Oh, we skipped. I'm going the wrong way.
We wish we had Harvard's.
There's 5 of those, so go down 2 more, and then Lafayette's going to be after that. Sorry, guys. This is moderator difficulty. This is not anybody's fault but my own. Look at that.
There's John in his natural habitat with his back to the camera.
So plenty of space, I guess.
Yeah,
that's the
plenty
point,
of space,
right?
and it's centralized and very well connected, something we didn't have in the past.
Cool. Imry, you've kind of spearheaded a lot of these efforts, and I know been a champion of sort of IP to the SVG College community at large. So tell us a little bit about your guys' evolution, where the department was when you first arrived, how that migration to IP happened, and then where you guys are today.
Sure. So when I started, we had 2 control rooms. Both of them were SD, both were composite. They didn't even do SDI. One was at football, one was at hockey, and they kind of muddled along. And I told them we couldn't really do that. We couldn't. This was 6 years ago. It wasn't the 80s. And I said we couldn't possibly keep on using composite and SD signals. And so they said, fine, let's build a central control room and let's start fibering everything to the central control room. We started doing that. The central control room that we have is at our hockey facility, and it was fiber to our football facility. And they said, fine, get whatever equipment you need, we'll make it a good control room, which they did. But it kind of got stalled because it turns out trenching and laying fiber is very expensive, and getting equipment on both sides to convert from fiber to copper is very expensive, and the control room stalled. It just supported hockey and football for a while. And our basketball facility got renovated last year, and we said, great, let's build a second central control room, and let's make the focus of that one IP. Let's not run any fibers to it. Let's not try to trench, and let's think about how we can build a control room against a IP infrastructure and connect as many venues as possible without that cost. Now you can bring my first photo, I think. So this is our basketball facility, and part of the renovation this past year was adding that video board, which is really how they even let me request another control room and money for anything. Next. There we go. So this is the basketball control room. It's built around NewTek equipment. The front bench has a TC1 and a NewTek 3-play 4800. And you can't see it in the back, but there's an AJT score system for graphics. And we use that for TV productions. We have a partnership with a local RSN, with Nessen, and we produce everything from there. The backbench is more for video board production. We have a TriCaster 860 back there. You can see the Daktronics equipment on the left. And on the right, can't see it, but there's a NewTek live text for graphics. And basketball is easy. We're right off the court, and there's nothing needed, except with IP, we can do any kind of production we want from here or now from our other control room. So, next slide. This is a soccer game we did. This is the entire setup, besides cameras and talent. There's a TriCaster Mini sitting there. There's a mixer. There's a Clearcom LQ and a Clearcom small main station. And I didn't have to ask anyone to move out of the way. There's no one there. It's not manned. Nothing is happening. All the camera feeds are going into that TriCaster Mini. Clearcom goes into LQ, not pictured, but there is a scorebot from Sportscast there for scoreboard information. And that all goes to the central control room. We can turn on the control room at basketball or at hockey. All the inputs just appear, communications just work. And so we don't have to buy big equipment, big replay. It allows us to do soccer on TV, which we couldn't do before. Next slide, maybe? There we go. This is the hockey football control room, and this is where we were doing that soccer game. We had some glare issues, which is what's going on in the monitors. But the control room was built for hockey, which is why there's a front bench for TV and a back bench for video board. But there was no hockey game, there was a soccer game, and so we just set up everything to receive the soccer feeds. It was literally just using the mouse to control the feeds. There was no cost to it, which was great. Is there another slide? There we go. And this is the basketball control room, again, the front bench. We had a water polo game that ESPN wanted to pick up for ESPN3. We said, well, water polo, obviously in the pool, there is nothing there. I said, fine, we'll schlep the TriCaster Mini, connect all the feeds in, and here we are doing a water polo feed for ESPN out of the basketball control room, which is next door. And so IP has really allowed us to do all these things we couldn't even imagine before because the cost was unimaginable. And getting fiber cost for football is easy because it's football, but no one would have let us run fiber to the pool for water polo. That's just not how money works. At Harvard, I don't know if there's someone here from UCLA or UC, water polo.
Right. I was going to say Southern California, maybe Chapman
Absolutely,
or something. Yeah. And a lot of this has been driven by NewTek and their NDI format, which is sort of the basis standard for NewTek's IP-enabled products. It's interesting because NewTek is so entrenched in this community and has been for so many years with the TriCaster and a lot of other sort of cost-efficient products that work for very easy to use in the college market. So it made sense that you guys sort of went down this NDI route and said, okay, well, we're going to bring NDI to the masses with a royalty-free format as long as it works on the products that you're already using and that type of thing. So Chris, tell us a little bit about what you've seen in this evolution. These aren't the only 3 schools going through this transition.
Certainly not.
Some other examples and some of the workflows that have been enabled as a result.
I actually wanted to recall a conversation I had with actually the Lafayette tech guys. This was about a year ago, right when the TC1 launched. They had actually contacted me, and they were asking for a demo, and I pitched this wild idea. I said, hey guys, this is going to blow your mind, but I don't even have to be on your facility for you guys to test to see if IP is going to work. And literally we took them through the whole process and got them some free toolkits. And I said, put this on your laptop, go into the field, put this in the production room, and see if it talks. If that talks, we will take the rest of the facility and get you the gear you guys need. And I think it took a week for them to come back with the documentation. They had to get some things set up because they were sort of just preliminary call, but they were working with NDI within that fast and setting their networking up so they could be ready to go. So that was just that amazing conversation. That conversation with Imry and Harvard. But looking at sort of the broader strokes, a lot of universities working with NewTek are looking to solve everything. They don't want to just solve football. They want to solve the ability to do all their sports and have everything centralized. There's some major D1 colleges who've been doing like a lot of cutting edge work with us, and that's related to some of the recent things we dropped at NAB. Now that we have our replay completely IP enabled, that's enabled a lot of people to come back back and say, okay, if I can do my IP in replay and I can do my entire production in replay, that now it sort of expands what we do. And obviously, we now have the high-end sports graphics, but we have a bunch of different graphics packages. So in the D1 space, I think we're growing, especially with things like ESPN Plus coming around the corner. A lot of those guys have been working with us kind of under the cover to see like what we need to do. I had a dinner last night with a couple colleges who had some very practical responses about, hey, this NDI thing is phenomenal. Can we do more with it? And
right.
We always like to hear that. One of the things that we're trying to accomplish is we want to give you guys practical tools. The whole IP thing can be sort of a little esoteric at first, but if we make these things practical, like our replay is now IP enabled, what does that do for us? Okay, our replay operator can be anywhere in the school. Okay, we can now have a centralized control room. Well, what other things can we take that and apply that to in our sports production space that'll be useful? And that's sort of like what I've been focusing on with NewTek.
Yeah, I mean, the concept has always been that whoever the user ends up being doesn't care that it's IP, right? It's just easier.
It should have no impact on your performance. It should just work the way you think it's supposed to work. And the fact that there's IP behind it doesn't matter. And that's sort of what our goal has been with NDI. It's like, we want to make this so democratized and easy that you wouldn't even notice the difference in your workflows. But then once we've gotten you on that path, we can then expand your platforms and grow sort of what sort of things you have going on.
So that brings up the topic of what we just had a panel that dealt largely with, and that's training, right? I mean, most of the people that are using the tools for you guys are students, freelancers, people that need to be trained. I think that there is a little bit of a misconception sometimes that IP tools equals complicated. Is that the case? Is that what you're finding? Tell us a little bit about the training process. How difficult was it? Did students and freelancers sort of click to it and just go, oh yeah, no duh, right away? Or was it a little bit more of a process? How did that kind of run through? And we'll come back down the line starting with Imry.
It was no problem at all, and training has not been a factor. I think some of my crew knows that it's IP, some know and don't care. I mean, it's simple. It's actually less prone to, well, it's prone to different issues, but it's less prone to issues than baseband, because you have to worry, and definitely fiber, because you have to worry about cables less, and you have to worry about dirt less and wear and tear. You have to worry about networking, but once that's set up, you really don't have to worry about it. So training has been non-existent for us. This is how you produce a game. This is how you tell a story. IP is just a tool. I mean, IP shouldn't be a goal. No one should go out and say, I want to do IP. That's neither here nor there. You have a problem and you need to solve it. And so IP is a potential solution that I think we all agree is very good and is definitely a growing solution. But I don't need to set up my crew and tell them, hey, we're doing IP today. It's going to be all different. They don't care.
Right. Scott, I know, like you said, you're a little bit more on the management layer, but I mean, what has the adoption rates sort of been in terms of understanding these tools at Lafayette?
Again, I would probably defer to our video production manager on that, but I can tell you the value that I see in training is making sure you have the right person doing the training. It also helps to have good people that want to learn it, of course, but having the right person is key in my mind, and we have that, and nobody can have him. He's not for sale.
Jose, you guys use a lot more than NDI, as you mentioned. More difficult when you come to Dante and some of the ClearCom tools and that type of thing?
Yeah, actually, at first it was a little bit more complicated for us just because we had to get our network configured correctly. So we spent a lot of time working with our IT department to make sure that the right ports were open and things were communicating back and forth. We have a lot of VLANs on our campus, so making sure that the right one is configured to this port. So at first it was a bit of a headache, to be honest, but with the more and more we use it, the better it's become. I still feel like if me or my coworker is not there for a game and we leave the students and an issue comes up with that's IP-based, unless that student is somewhat knowledgeable on IP addresses and DHCP and stuff like that, I usually have to try to walk them through it, which usually it's pretty easy. The nice thing about being on IP too is that I can just pull up my laptop wherever I am, as long as I have internet connection. I can VPN into our network and pretty much fix anything that's wrong. So it's allowed some headaches, but at the same time it's allowed us to be a little bit more flexible on what we do.
Going back down, Chris, what is the training protocol for you guys with some of the NDI stuff?
I mean, the general purpose for NDI, the only thing we're trying to make NDI do all the magic work for you. So we don't want to train you anything different than we would do in your typical production. This is how you select your input. This is how you switch. This is how you stream. We don't want any of that to be any different. So we continue to push the NDI technology further and further and further to do sort of the magic of fixing any sort of issues with it, making sure sync's established and your audio and video coming through and metadata and all that. We push all that into the tech, and that's because when we looked at the market, training everybody to be IT wizards overnight is going to be costly and time inefficient, but if we make the technology such that it's doing most of the work for you, then you're fine. And in the case of the few times where we have had to talk with IT teams, we have a bunch of simple documentation that gives the basics of what NDI is doing. If you can understand that, and I've had a lot of success with collegiate IT teams, it's not hard to set up. And then what the IT teams sort of benefit is, okay, I now know what this traffic is. I'm less scared of it. I think that's also a big thing that we encounter is I look at this IT traffic and I don't know what this is going to do to my network. Am I open to vulnerabilities and things like that? So in general, the training question is we don't have to do anything special for training. If anything, what we're going to open up is hopefully you guys can train more people because you want to do more activities.
Right.
But the productions, your TriCaster workflows, 3-player workflows, it's all the same except now it's grabbing an NDI source. Right. And how to set up that NDI source, turn it on and plug it in.
Yeah, I mean, that does open up the topic of sort of adopting a campus-wide mentality, which I think runs across many topics that we've addressed at this conference for a decade. But in this case, it's especially interesting because, number one, it's kind of become a cliche at this point, but your IT person is your best friend at a certain point, right? Or it better be. If it's not, better figure out a way to, grab him or her pizza or something like that. And then it goes the other way too, where now that you guys have a bit of an IP network, IP infrastructure, how can you help other departments, right? How can you use this infrastructure and leverage it to create more content, because then maybe that comes back around, right? And this whole thing makes sense that you guys put all this work into it. So Jose, examples of that both ways. Number one, working with the IT department, getting what you need, and then possibly offering up this, IP infrastructure to produce content outside of athletics.
Yeah, so we have a pretty good relationship with our IT department. We didn't at first because I was asking for a lot. I made their jobs a little bit more difficult at the beginning. But they're great to work with. They give us everything we need. They're always there to support us. I'm sure they dread the moment they see my name come up on their phone. But they're, when we started venturing in IP, they had to reconfigure some switches. They had to give us a couple of the fiber strands so we could run our camera signals back and forth. But that's situations where it allowed us to create a really good relationship with them, which now we have, and it's really key to be doing this. But the other way around, because we are the video experts on campus, they are constantly coming to us asking us for, hey, we're looking at doing this in the classroom. What do you think? What should we look into? What technologies have you seen that will allow us to do what we're trying to do? So it's becoming more of a two-way where we're offering up our expertise after they've lent us theirs.
And does that give you kind of some more political capital, you think, in the future, where the next time you ask for something, right?
Yeah, and actually we started, this year we started kind of venturing into making some capital requests, and we started working together. So every month I meet with our IT department and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. What can you guys do to help? And I'm sure this is the case at most universities, but when I'm coming in asking for a lot of money and it's going to not just affect athletics, but it's going to affect the entire campus, it's a lot easier of a pitch than just me asking, hey, athletics needs this, athletics needs this. No, it's athletics needs this, marketing needs this, IT needs this, the digital lab in the library where people learn how to edit need this. It's a lot easier of a pitch.
Yeah, it becomes a campus-wide sales pitch, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. Imry, what's your relationship like with your IT team over there, and how have you guys maybe increased non-athletics content, or are you looking to use in some of these resources?
The relationship with IT is good now. It didn't start like that. So I kind of stumbled onto IP and to NDI because we had some issues and I was looking for solutions, and I met with the NewTek guys at NAB, and it just seemed like something I wanted to try. So I did. And, if you just try NDI, there's very little impact on the network, and Harvard has a very strong network. But as I continued to grow it and grow it and grow it, eventually it started getting noticed, and we have a gig network, and they sent me, the IT people sent me graphs of our IT usage, and there are little bumps when people check their email, and then there's huge jump in the middle there. And they said, what is this? What are you? I said, there was a soccer game, and it's over IP, and this is what happens. And, whoa, we didn't know anything about this. And so that's when we really have to sit down with them. I had to sit down with them and say, this is what we're doing, this is why it makes sense, and they don't really have a say. I'm going to do this. I'm going to continue to use IP, and I'm not asking anyone. But if we work together, it's going to be better for everyone. Our network is good because it's very strong. It's a gig all across. MDNS is enabled, so I can have discovery between NDI sources. But our VLAN, all the athletics facilities share a VLAN, but it has 3 subnets. And so I really wanted all my equipment to be on one subnet with static IP addresses. And so I sent them a request. I said, I have some equipment. I'd like everything to have a static IP reservation on one subnet. They said, sure, just send a couple of things, that could be fine. So I sent them a list of 110 pieces of equipment. They said, this is not something we do. I said, well, this is what we do. And so they did it, they understood. I sent them documentation from NewTek. They understand what we're doing now, I think, kind of. I gave them a tour of the basketball control room, which wowed them. They had no idea we were doing anything like that, or anyone on campus is doing anything like that. And so I think now we have their buy-in. They understand what we do, the importance of it, and if they just do what I ask them to do, everyone's life gets better. I think that's
wow,
just
that's it. Just do exactly what I tell you to do, no questions asked.
That's not IP.
If only life
just
worked
in
that
life
way.
in general.
Yeah. And second part of the question is just real quick. Graduations. Is anybody else using these facilities? And then maybe that helps you down the road to get more
So
capital.
we don't know. And Harvard Athletics, the athletics campus is kind of separate physically and administratively from the rest of Harvard, and so they don't really touch our facilities, we don't really touch theirs, but they do very, very little streaming. They do a lot of lecture capture, that's what Harvard does, but there is very little streaming. When they do streaming, which is graduation, a couple of other things, they usually outsource it, and they usually come to us and ask questions. Oh, how do you guys do this? How do you work with IT? And so it's different, and there's very little of it, which
you're fine with. You get to focus on your job. Yeah. Scott, I don't imagine you have a lot of day-to-day interaction with the IT team, but I'm curious about the second half of this question, and that's how have you used these tools beyond just athletics?
Actually, I do have a lot of interaction with our IT team.
Well, screw me then. All right.
Sorry. So the relationship that we have with our IT team is absolutely critical. I can't underscore it enough. I know both gentlemen to either side have underscored that, but it is absolutely critical. Getting beyond the initial, making them really realize and understand that virtually all athletic events occur outside of 9 to 5. That's huge. You got to get them beyond that. But having them become a partner in the process is absolutely instrumental. I would say beyond IT, another huge campus partner, it's an obvious one, but sometimes people don't always think of them, are the finance folks.
Sure.
Getting your CFO on board, believe it or not, many people in the finance division are actually sports fans, and they can get it. They actually can wrap their hands around, oh yeah, this makes sense. We should be doing this, and we should find a way. So building those partnerships and having those relationships, getting the top people at each of those divisions on your campus, it's absolutely critical. The second part of your question, the campus events. We're the only area of campus, we're the only department on campus, we're much smaller than Harvard, but we're the only department on campus that does any type of live broadcasting. Right. So we're the only ones that really get that. So yeah, when it comes to non-athletic events, of course we're looked to for that, and we take pride in that. It's a way to, we get FaceTime with people from the president's office, and when you have those opportunities, you build up so much credit and trust with those people. It comes back in spades. It really does.
Right. And we'll get into a little bit more about that with the central control room session later this afternoon, how you kind of sell your administration on why this makes sense and everything. I want to get to one more topic before we go out to questions with the crowd, and that's we've almost exclusively focused on using IP as a campus tool. But we are also very much seeing IP as a transmission tool, using the public internet in lieu of very costly fiber, very costly sat uplinks, that type of thing. I'll throw it out to anybody who wants to answer. How are you using IP for off-campus events or for events that happen on campus that you're trying to distribute elsewhere beyond just the IP network that you have installed? Go for it, Imry.
Sure. So distribution has always been a big point for us because we stream all our games, and RTMP streaming is easy and not really labor intensive. But we want to make sure that we distribute our games to as many destinations as possible so people watch them. We partner again with Nessun, our local RSN, to broadcast our games. And year one, when we did this 4 or 5 years ago, the Nessun is 2 miles down the road. They're very close to us, but the only way we could figure to send a signal to Nessun was with an uplink truck, 2 miles down the road. And so we would rent an uplink truck for every game, which really limited how many games we could send to them. They're very expensive, and we ended up, I think, having 4 games that year to Nessun, which didn't really make sense. And so we started exploring IP transmission solutions. We use an encoder by Ericsson, we use LiveView packs, we use Halevi encoders and Fujitsu encoders, we use LTN. And so we had all these solutions we started testing out, and it really allowed us to grow the number of games we had on Nessun. This past year, I think we had 45 games instead of 4, and it didn't really require anything from us. There was no additional cost. We worked with Nessun to choose and provide an IP encoder. We just plug an SDI feed to the back of it, and it's unmanaged. It's just over public IP, and it increased by a factor of 10 the number of games, and by much more than a factor of 10 the number of eyeballs we have watching our productions. And it was really a no-brainer. It's so easy now, and it takes no work from us. It's really good.
Jose or Scott?
Yeah. Well, like a lot of what Imry said, we also have a deal with our local RSN, and without IP transmission, there's no way we would be doing it because we wouldn't be able to pay for a SAT truck. It's just too expensive. So we do about 20 games, all delivered through IP. We have, I don't even know how many games on an OTT platform where LTN is our transport, and then everything gets streamed. So it's massive. I don't know how we would get the distribution that we do without it.
So this is going to sound like another plug for Chris and NewTek, but because of the pricing of, we were able to get the control room and the equipment we wanted and needed. We were able to also afford not only fiber to our campus 3 miles away from the main campus, we were also able to afford installing fiber, a fiber run to feed to our local television provider as well. So flipping that model, so to speak, where in the past we've only had television productions that were streamed. Now we're going to have streaming-only productions that are going to air on television, which is really exciting for us in so many of our sports.
There you go. There's another pitch for you, Chris, on the next campus that you visit. I got a couple more things here, but want to see if anybody has questions out there. I know this topic can be intimidating, but there are no stupid questions when it comes to IP, with the exception of all of them. There you go, right here in the front.
That's the question that's on everybody's mind, and that is the cost related to this process.
It costs as much as you want to put into it.
That's not good.
The good thing about using TriCasters and NewTek equipment these days is that anything that you buy right now has NDI built in. And so if you wanted to build a central control room that has a TriCaster as a switcher, and 3Play as your replay, and live text as your graphics, they all communicate over IP right now. There's nothing to do. There's no additional cost. The cost is just to buy a switcher, replay, and graphics. If you wanted to get feeds from another location, you were to buy one of their pieces of equipment, like Studio I/O,
yeah.
that sends it over. That's where the additional cost is. It's getting something from far away to a central control room. There's an additional cost. But if you've done any research on cost of fiber equipment, it's a fraction of that. The guy before here, who was from Avid, wherever he was talking about buying an engine versus buying a carburetor and all the other pieces. Buying IP these days is like buying an engine. Buying fiber for me is like buying a carburetor, because there's little pieces, and you forgot to convert here, and you forgot it, and this was multi-mode, but it's single mode, and you have to change them, and you really don't have to worry about it, and the cost is, there's no cost in transmission, and the cost is any additional ancillary gear, but it's very, very few zeros at the end.
There was a
I was going to add to that. Imry, do you know how many instances of NDI there are out there? You know how many companies are working with NDI right now? We have over 5,000 instances of NDI SDK in development. So this is not a small ecosystem. 4 years before we had NDI launched, we had about 75 third parties. So if you want a piece of gear that speaks NDI and you go out into that room, you might not even find a vendor in this facility here who isn't doing NDI in some piece of their production. So it doesn't have to be even our own first-party products. The third party of NDI is gigantic as well. So there's other pieces to this IP that you don't even have to talk to me about. You can talk to somebody like the guys at LiveView, they do NDI, or the guys at Panasonic do an NDI in their gear. So there's a lot out there that if our solution isn't the right piece, it's probably going to have NDI through somebody else's solution anyway. So we're hoping that that's the ease of use platform, and NewTek continues to try to make our things cost effective as they can be.
And that is how you plug, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. Very, very solid.
You touched on training earlier, and we are at a college summit, and we're talking about training people in what you're saying is a very simple way of operating with this, and you don't really need a lot of training. In the broadcast space, having just attended a SMPTE conference last week, it's come up that but year over year, this gap between broadcast engineers who are kind of aging out to a large extent, those of us who have 30 years left, and then those of us who are still in college. And with the barriers to entry here that we're talking about, with IP kind of standing for I don't understand to a lot of folks, and other people saying, oh, it's simple, there still is this disparity between the broadcast mentality of how to transmit a signal and the IP or IT folks of how smoothness is not as important and speed is not as important, where it's very important in sports and live. So are you, as the canaries in the caves at your organization, are you working with your curriculum teams to build broadcast IT people, or is that not a thing yet?
It's a thing. It's not a thing at our level, I would say. Last year, Notre Dame gave a nice presentation, and I think they're doing it again this year, about their setup and their IP setup, which is much, much bigger. And there's a whole big flow chart with all these lines connecting in. And that's where you really need a broadcast IP technician, someone who knows what they're doing, because there's a lot there and a lot that can go wrong. Our IT people kind of understand what we do, but not really. It's not like if I didn't come to work, they could take over. That's not how it works. But we've never found a need. We don't have an engineer on staff, and I haven't found a need for one. Not to say that engineers aren't needed. It's just in our setup and the way we do it and the size and the equipment we chose, it's just not required. And so, no.
It speaks to the point I kind of opened up with the idea of what we're talking about with you guys is a lot about it's budget driven, it's simplicity driven, it's just kind of getting it done driven. You wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. And a lot of that gap between the IT and the broadcast engineers is more on that SMPTE 2110 side, sort of higher end massive deployments of multiple control rooms being interconnected across multiple cities, that type of thing. But it's an issue that we're definitely seeing across the industry. So I encourage everyone out there to tell their broadcast and journalism schools to create a broadcast IT program, because there's a lack of them right now. Question over here with Karen.
Yeah, so this question's mostly for Imry, but anybody can add in. Sorry, your situation is close to mine. So I got an NC1 IO for testing the other day, ran it through with IT. We're on 1 gig switches across campus. And they kind of flipped out because it's using at least 600 megs of that 1 gig service. So my question for you is, do you ever have any issues in high traffic times on the network where you see problems in the video signal using NDI?
Yes. Before we thought to consider something like this, we did have some issues where we did a soccer game where we had 4 different NDI feeds coming from the field to our central control room. Our central control room is all NDI. So there was replay feeds going back and forth and a lot of things happening. And we did bump into that 1 gig ceiling, and we started to see signal loss. There are ways to get around it by designing the flow a little more efficiently and by using NDI HX, which is the compressed version of NDI. Because of that, we got a NewTek Connect Spark, which you can connect to a camera and to internet, and it does compress the signal much more than NDI does, and uses significantly less bandwidth. So when we have days like this where I know that we're going to run into some kind of ceiling, We just use the Spark and use NDI-HX. What I told our IT people is, listen, email checking is not going to be affected by this. People can still do work in their offices. If I'm going to bump up against the ceiling, that's my problem, not yours. Don't shut me off. I know I have a gig. I will use up that gig. And if there are any problems, I'll take care of it. And they were fine with that because I think just like you, they were ready to shut me down. I said, no, it's fine. I'll deal with it, but don't worry about it.
In the back?
Yes. As far as graphics programs, some of you mentioned live text with TriCaster and 3Play. See that ESPN 3, ESPN Plus has some specifications they put out there. Are any of you on ESPN 3, ESPN, going to be on ESPN Plus with some of the graphics packages that you have already?
I can answer, but I'm happy to let someone else.
So our University of Portland itself is not on any ESPN platform yet, but we actually do some third-party stuff for a USL team. And so we have now started putting that on ESPN Plus, but we have an expression, so it's pretty easy for that.
Yes, we did some things for ESPN 3 where all our games are going to be on ESPN Plus next year. And this is what Jose was talking about. There are a lot of companies out there now supporting NDI, much more than before and much more than I expected. And so many of our graphics are powered by AJT systems, and they didn't used to support NDI, and now they do. And they didn't used to support the ESPN graphics package, but now they do. And so we can get all of ESPN's graphics package fully approved by ESPN, all on 2 channels of NDI using the AJT system we already have. So it's not a problem. I know that Ross is also working on having NDI on the expression. So
I was about to say, yeah, I don't think you can actually name a graphic system in the sports space that isn't pushing NDI feeds out. We have first party with VizRT now, the NVG1. So if you want to do the highest level of graphics you could possibly do, all in 4K, we got that available. But literally down the line in third parties, every graphics manufacturer has an NDI option, and that's largely due to you guys, right? You guys have TriCasters in your facilities. They want to work with you, and NDI being this simplicity tool means that they can work with you. So you could name almost any graphics company, and there's a couple guys exhibiting. We make our own product, and we're actually expanding upon that. At the end of the year, we'll have something that's going to be sort of a little revolutionary for how you do graphics on your TriCaster. But there's a bunch of different programs that are supporting this at every level, from the very top from Viz all the way down to something like New Blue FX, which is cost effective. You can have that on your laptop and sort of work with that.
Real quick, because I got one more question briefly over there.
Question for Chris mainly. I'm curious to see what you think the future of IP is in the next 5 years or so. I know you guys released the interconnected switcher, which is basically an IP-related switcher. So if you could just expand upon that, I'd be interested to hear.
And if you guys want to talk about how SMPTE 2110 being approved impacts that, and what the NDI plan is in relation to sort of a more industry-wide standard.
Sure. We'll answer those questions. I'll talk about that one first, and we'll talk about the future as well. Contemporarily, obviously, SMPTE 2110 has been on the forefront talking about how they're sort of ratifying and pushing things out. And as soon as they sort of made the standard public, at NAB, we released a product that will turn NDI into 2110 or 2110 into NDI. If you are working with an IP standard and that IP standard is public, we want to be working with that IP standard as well. It's going to be going IP eventually, and eventually is not this far-flung thing. Like in 3 years, everything's going to be IP enabled at some level in your production. When I look at the future, I look at a couple of things for colleges. One, you guys are probably going to be moving very quickly towards having some kind of local cloud-based setups in your facilities. There's going to be data centers and things in there so that instead of having a bunch of dedicated space and gear, you have one dedicated space, and then if you need to do hockey and soccer and volleyball and all these other things in a given moment, you'll just spin this stuff up. I know that that's the future because we're already working on virtualization products, so that's going to be the bigger demand as things go on. So that'll be kind of a little bit of weirder space for where we are in sports. But the other things I'm starting to look at is a ton of tools and specialized things coming out of NDI being this open source development thing. So we have a lot of companies tackling specifics that are unique to, I think I had a conversation 2 weeks ago with guys who do bull riding. Like they want to develop their own graphics packages and all these other things, and NDI is giving them that tool. So it's going to expand a lot quicker than we would have thought. It won't just be tailored to the major sports. It won't just just be all football, baseball, basketball. It's going to grow a lot bigger than that. So those pieces are in the future. And then looking down the line for us in NewTek, we got some stuff coming in that's going to help for 4K. We're looking at the development they have around in Japan with an 8K mandate, so NDI can support those kind of things. We're looking at all facets. We want to be able to deliver NDI to your scoreboards, to your concession stands. We want to be able to push NDI at a level where it is just as easy to integrate and utilize in every facet of your production, beyond just telling the story for the sports watchers, but for all facets of the facility. So we are looking at this whole massive ball of all these things being IP. Why can't they talk to each other? Well, we're going to try to do that with NDI.
I'm keeping you guys from food very briefly because I want to give you guys a chance, 20 seconds real quick. We're coming up at the summer. That means project time. How are you guys looking to expand going into next season with some of these IP tools, whether it's adding facilities, bigger productions? Real quick, about 15 seconds piece.
Yeah, so one of the big projects this summer, we're redoing our video board in our basketball arena, and we're looking heavily in IP and how to integrate the two, our control room for our live broadcast and whatever it ends up being for the video board. They really want to up our production on that, and so we're looking a lot into IP for that.
Sweet. Scott?
So, excuse me, a proposal we've had in hand for a while and we've been looking at, and we're probably going to move forward over the summer, is with the NDI PTZ cameras and installing them in, we're looking at 3 venues on our campus. Our president is really into watching live streaming, and we have a lot of guest lectures on campus. We're very fortunate, as I'm sure many in the room are, and we're looking at ways to solve that using our control room and using the technology that exists. And yes, Chris, we'll take a discount too for all the plugs.
Imry, close us out.
I like cameras in every location possible. Wherever you think a camera might be able to squeeze in, I like to put a camera there. And so that's what we're working on over the summer, especially for hockey. Cameras in penalty boxes, cameras behind the goals, cameras on the benches. We're right now installing a PTZ camera under our video board at hockey, and then we'll move on to other sports. And so wherever we can stick little cameras and then figure out how to connect them, that's what we do. Little Marshall cameras, we put them everywhere.